Derek, in last episode, I told you the story about my brother-in-law who works in Lyndhurst, and across the street, he had a Chipotle. And when they received their stimulus, the entire store quit. So Chipotle was closed for 3 days while they had to go out and find new employees to do that. So I'm putting a couple of things together. We recently saw in the headlines that Amazon was increasing its minimum wage. And in addition to that, they were offering some signing bonuses for people who would come to work. McDonald's has also followed suit, and they have increased their minimum wage. And we're seeing a lot of this across all industries. As I went to Home Depot today, big giant sign out front that said, now hiring. What I want to look at is we're beginning to see, at least in the headlines in the news, that a lot of these companies are maybe fast pacing some of their automation. I read an article where Walmart and Kroger, because of the COVID because of the COVID downturn and the push to get everything sanitized, they actually automated their cleaning service after hours. So they actually had robots going through their store, spraying and cleaning, a job that was previously done by workers. So I want you to dust off your crystal ball, because I want to look into the future here. If we do have a world here which is moving increasingly to automation, replacing some of the manual labor that we're seeing now being done with companies, what are the benefits to that? As an investor, are there places we can invest to benefit from that? And what are the potential negative drawbacks that we would see from a more automated society?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good one, because I think we might have some disagreements. And I wanted to touch on the presidential campaign of somebody that I supported last term was Andrew Yang. His campaign gained support, but he was his main platform was focused on the future of work and automation. And he had some really interesting ideas and points to make on this topic. So hopefully you learned something new in this podcast. And if you like the episode, share it with a friend. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And Nate, let's get into it.
Well, Derek, let's start this episode by getting from an investor's point of view. If we have companies and they're larger corporations that are beginning to automate some of the labor processes that they've had before, and let's face it, a lot of these workers are minimum wage workers that are being replaced by the automation. That represents, as I looked online here, those people who rely on minimum wage to earn a living account for about 2.3% of the American population, or a little over 14 million people, depend on that. So if we are investors, and that is the case, where are some potential places we could look to invest? The one that is kind of close to my family is Rockwell Automation. My father-in-law worked for Rockwell for a long time, had a very successful career there. But Rockwell specializes in controls and automating processes. If you go to, took my daughters and family to Hershey, Pennsylvania. And when you go there to their factory, you can make your own candy bar. And what's cool about the whole process is Rockwell was instrumental in kind of designing that. So when your chocolate gets poured into a mold, then travels down an assembly line and it flips it over and it drops sprinkles on it, all that stuff is automated. So they don't actually have any workers touching that. It's all done by automation. So Rockwell Automation is one of them. They're based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They're about a $30 billion market cap. They're actually in the S&P 500. And a lot of the large cap or growth funds that you would get into would have Rockwell in there. So a lot of people probably own Rockwell without even knowing about it. But that's something that we could dive into. They have averaged over the past year, they've averaged about a 27% return. And then, of course, one more here that I'll get onto is a much larger corporation, which would be Siemens. Siemens is a competitor of Rockwell. They're based out of Germany. And Siemens is, I said, a much larger company. They're about a $132 billion market cap. They pay a nice dividend, and they've had competitive growth of 61% over the past trailing 12 months. As I'm looking at some of the companies I looked at, I'm wondering if a lot of their growth rate is spurred because of the COVID shutdown, where companies are maybe in fast forward drive to automate their processes.
Yeah, I mean, this is nothing new, because we saw sort of like in the 1990s with some of the trade deals, and like with trade deals like NAFTA, A lot of manufacturing jobs got swept away from the Midwest. There's a lot of automation. And like you said, I would imagine that those, like in Hershey, Pennsylvania, I don't think that those machines were put in place in the past 5 years. Those are probably there for a good little while now. So as for my picks for how to invest for automation, I think any company that's involved with artificial intelligence and sort of like, I think Amazon's a good play because their sort of warehousing logistics system, Amazon Web Services, I think that's a good bet going forward for automation and AI. And I think NVIDIA is a good one because of those, they make the chips that are going to, the high-powered computing chips that are going to be necessary for a lot of we call it the Internet of Things, where your like smart refrigerators or smart sinks, like things you wouldn't think of connected to the internet. Sort of everything's going to be connected to the internet, and like all of those robots making manufacturing, they're all going to be using these chips, and I think you want exposure to that.
Yeah, a lot of the companies that, I guess, if you're looking to invest in automation, you could look at the companies that are actually creating the automation or providing it. And I have a couple more here that I want to get into that I thought were pretty cool. But also the companies that are benefiting from the automation. You had mentioned Amazon. Amazon would be a great example. I mean, it's not hard to imagine a future with Amazon where you've got robots running the warehouses, you've got robots delivering the items, or drones, or whatever that is. So
right.
You could see a total mechanical process there from order to delivery. Even a company like McDonald's, like you could say, okay, are we automating the cheeseburgers, the making of that? Well, even like, and you're seeing this now, like you can walk into McDonald's and they have those kiosks where you could push button. The person who was taking your order before can be easily replaced by entering it into a computer, and it delivers your orders, and you can say no pickles, no onions, all that stuff, right? And that makes McDonald's potentially more productive. It's got maybe an upfront cost in getting that going on, but you don't have people calling off sick. You don't have workers that are inefficient at that job. So in the long run, it potentially makes companies more efficient. The company that caught my eye that I thought was pretty cool is a company called Zebra Technologies. Have you heard of them before?
No, I haven't.
So Zebra Technologies, ticker symbol ZBRA, up 102% in the past trailing 12 months. A PE of 41, so it's a little bit rich right now. But one of the things that they do is they make these printers that sell wristbands and labels and tickets. And so an example that they came out with is they had a shipping label that was temperature sensitive, and it was used to distribute the vaccines so that they could tell if the items inside that package or carton were under the required temperature in order to make the vaccines effective.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah, right. You essentially have a smart label there that tells what's going on with that. Another company is called ABB Ltd, which makes robotics. They actually make the robotics. This is an interesting company, up 81% in the past trailing 12 months, headquartered in Switzerland, but its PE is only 13. So that caught me because here's a company that's up 81% over the past 12 months, but still only has a PE of 13. So I'm probably going to take a little bit deeper dive into that for myself to kind of see it. I'm not saying that's an investment selection that you should go out and do, but that particularly caught my eye because right now what we're seeing, Derek, in the market is these high valuation companies that are reporting great earnings. The market's having a harder time sending them forward. So if we can find something that maybe has a lower multiple, potentially that is an investment opportunity.
Yeah. The Warren Buffett model, value investing versus growth investing. We talk about that all the time.
Yeah. We're right in Warren Buffett's wheelhouse right now in the current market.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he always has that analogy of like the batter's box where you have to wait for your pitch to come in. He's probably swinging. He's been waiting for pitches for all of 2020 because there's a lot of high-flying speculative stocks. I mean, but he invested in airlines, so
that's true.
Yeah,
you can't. You don't hit a home run every time. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, his batting average is pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. So let's get into any more companies that you were looking at.
I mean, like Google would be another one. Anybody that I'm a little more reluctant to recommend hardware names, like people that are actually making robotics, because that seems like a more cost-intensive and like computationally difficult space to get into. Like if they're, do you know Boston Dynamics? I don't think it's a publicly traded company, but have you ever seen? Well,
No, I have
okay,
not.
okay. So as soon as we stop recording, follow Boston Dynamics on YouTube, or subscribe to Boston Dynamics on YouTube. They make robots basically, and it's freaky because it's like out of an episode of Black Mirror where they make robots that are, I think anthropomorphized is the word. They're like human-like robots, or they'll make robots that are like dogs basically, and they like move. And the crazy thing is, so they'll do like apparently one of the hardest things to do with robots is like throw in unexpected variables. I mean that makes sense. So if you like push them, like that's like one of the tests that they do, like try to knock them over, or like make them carry a box and like try to push them over and see if they can stabilize. And when you're watching these videos, I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but you actually feel bad because they're like whacking them with baseball bats and they're like kicking them, and you actually kind of feel bad for them, which is like the beginning of the end, like out of every sci-fi movie, is where you sort of feel bad for the robots and they take on more human-like qualities. It's bizarre. They're like sort of the leaders in the forefront of like hardware for robotics, and it's really really fascinating.
We're going to get there to that point, and it's coming probably sooner than we think, where we have a robot that is so lifelike that people have physical emotions for it.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching those with Lily, and because she's like an animal lover, and they'll like it's kind of sad because it's like they're kicking a dog, you know, and you just like, oh, I don't like watching those videos because you're kicking it's kicking a dog, but it's just scrap metal, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's bizarre. The videos are cool though. They did one. I don't know the name of the song. It's like, "Do you love me?" Na na na. That song. But they did like a dance routine with like 4 different robots and then 4 of these like dogs, and they were actually like like they dance better than I do, which isn't saying much, but you know, it's really cool.
So
cool.
So let's get into some of the negatives here.
Some of them.
Some of them.
It's possible that there are more negatives than positives, depending on how we.
It is possible.
Go ahead,
we're looking into the future here, and it's the unknown. So, So obviously, on the surface, it would seem if these workers are replaced by automation, and they are unskilled workers, meaning they're labor jobs. And let me rephrase that, because there are a lot of labor jobs that are skilled. Over the weekend, I helped a buddy of mine pour concrete, and highly intensive labor job. Potentially one of the hardest things that one of the hardest works I've done before. And I've baled hay, I've done concrete, I've done lots of things. But the skill and craftsmanship
is it's like just a term. Like it doesn't mean that you don't have any skills. It just means you aren't like college educated, which is dumb. Because like when you think of skills, like
sure.
you don't think you sat in a classroom. You know, you think of like physical skills. You know, but that's just a term that people say.
No, shout out to Sloan Concrete. If you ever see him on Instagram, look at his work. He is truly an artist with concrete. If you look at his house, his kitchen sink done in concrete, his table concrete, his outdoor deck, not a second level deck, concrete. Like everything is, and it's beautiful. I mean, everything from stamped wood. You'd walk on it, you'd be certain that you were walking on wood planks, but it's all stamped concrete. So definitely high level skill there in that job.
He's not a sponsor yet. Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. Yeah. So. Let's get back in. So those jobs are replaced. Not concrete, but the girl behind, or the lady behind, or the gentleman behind the McDonald's.
Or the truck driver, or the retail worker, the administrator. All of these jobs are.
Yes. Yep. These are now on robots.
Yeah. Right.
These are now done by robots. The potential problem on the surface, it would seem like, what do we do with these people now? Because it would seem like that everything is moving to. Last episode, you talked about the cars and the cars being a rolling computer. And you said now they have a diagnostic box that we plug in these cars. Mm-hmm. That did not replace the mechanic, but it forced the mechanic to upgrade his or her knowledge of how a car operated and how to repair it, right?
Sure.
And you're going to see that with the workers. They're going to either they're either going to have to increase their education, their know-how, or what I also believe is going to happen is I also think that there's a book out there called The Inevitable, and it's by Kevin Kelly. And I would recommend that anybody, it's a little bit dated now, but it's still as relevant as today. And he talked that one of the things he said is if you look at every technological revolution that we've had, it has created more jobs than it got rid of. And every time that we come to that process, somebody will say, well, it's different now because of this. It's different now. And we're saying that with AI, right? It's different now because they're truly going to replace us and where we're going to go. Before I got on here, I didn't even know this existed. The Institute for the Institute for the Future is actually what it's called. IFTF. They claim that they believe that 85% of the jobs that people will have in 2035 have not been created yet. Something that will, if we look at in the past, the typesetter, the milkman, the switchboard operator, all these were phased out because of some technology, but yet in 2019, fall of 2019, our unemployment rate was 3.5%. So at that point in time, basically, if you wanted a job, you were out there working.
What year was that?
That was fall of 2019.
I'm going to ding you every time you say unemployment rate. It's just
Why is that?
Because you should be focusing on labor force participation rate, because unemployment rate doesn't include. Unemployment rate is a number that can be used, but in the context that we're about to use it, it should not be. It's not the correct number that should be used, because it doesn't include. It doesn't include discouraged workers and underemployed people. So somebody with a college degree that is working like a minimum wage job or something, it doesn't include those types of workers. So.
But I would go back to the minimum wage. People who rely on minimum wage for a living has been declining. For decades.
Okay, so let me give you a better example. So somebody with like a STEM degree that's working like an administrative job in a university.
Sure. But just because you have a STEM degree doesn't guarantee you to a job in that field. I went to school for exercise physiology. I'm not working as an exercise physiologist. I don't want to be. But
sure, but okay, so we're talking about like not a non-salary equivalency. So somebody that should be making 120 and they're making 40. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, right.
Okay. And I agree. Sometimes that happens, right? Especially when you're between jobs, though. But I would tip my hat to the person who goes to work rather than sitting home and collecting the unemployment benefit.
Okay, so then go ahead and continue with what you were saying. Sorry, I just wanted to.
What I'm saying is and everything we're talking about is unknown. So it's unsure what's going to happen. It may be the reality that these workers are replaced by automation, and then there's just no place for them because everything has been replaced by automation, and no new jobs are created. I'm simply looking at the past. And if we look at the past, it tells us that every time that new technology has come along, it has created, for example, the internet. Look at the internet. So, as I mentioned, switchboard operators, they're a thing of the past here right now. There's people that make money on the internet just by their personality. They've got a YouTube channel or they've got an Instagram thing, and advertisers pay them to do their thing. That's ridiculous. And of course, not that many people actually are able to do that. But think about how many online businesses were created because of the internet. Think how many businesses have been enhanced because of the internet and therefore have been able to hire new workers.
Sure. So I think the best way to go about this, because I might go on a rant, like where I have to because some of the ideas that we're about to talk about are very involved and have a lot of different stuff. So if there's anything else you would like to add, I think is there anything else you wanted to add about creative destruction or anything like that?
So I have a solution. My solution is going to be different than yours.
Right.
And I don't know if I know what your solution is. I know what you're looking to. I don't know if that's a solution. But let's get into it. Let's go back and forth as pros and cons. So here would be my solution. Or let me let you open up actually first.
Okay. So just to piggyback off what you were talking about before, let's just start with creative destruction because you had mentioned that. So creative destruction is basically just so you said switchboard workers, milkman, those jobs were they disappeared because of technological progress, or in the Industrial Revolution, they were replaced by machines. You didn't have people manually weaving blankets. You had the invention of the loom, or fill in the blank with any of the jobs in the Industrial Revolution. And then, but with the destruction of those jobs, many jobs were created, like the people that had to work the loom, or like you said, with the age of the internet, people are starting e-commerce stores. We never could have predicted that in the past because those jobs just weren't around yet. So anytime there's innovation, certain jobs will be destroyed and then certain jobs will be created. That's called creative destruction. So going forward, like with automation and AI, and when I say automation, I'm not talking about past automation. I'm saying like innovation in the 21st century with uh, like the rapid increases of technology. So in the Industrial Revolution, we saw there were riots, many years of fighting and settling tensions that resulted in like 40-hour work weeks. They made child labor illegal, changed working conditions, and led to the creation of the minimum wage. So big systemic changes just as a result of this technological progress. So there's no reason to believe that or something worse won't happen when you think of some of the jobs that are going to be destroyed with automation and AI. So the five most common jobs in the United States are administrator jobs. I have them in order. So it's administrator jobs, retail jobs, food jobs, truck driving jobs, and manufacturing. And all of those jobs make up 50% of the workforce. And only 32% of the population are college graduates. So the average American is a high school graduate, and all of those jobs are subject to automation. And a common critique is that, well, either sort of those jobs or people that work those jobs are going to be retrained into the new jobs of the economy. And I would say two things to that. One, so with creative destruction, the jobs that are being destroyed and the jobs that are being created aren't happening in the same place. So the jobs that are being destroyed are happening in states in the Midwest, like Ohio, Michigan, and like West Virginia. But the jobs that are being created are happening along the coasts in the cities in like Silicon Valley. So there would have to be some sort of correction for that, where because it doesn't seem apparent that there's the next Silicon Valley is going to be in Detroit or Cleveland, for example. Like those are just two cities that I picked because there isn't like a vibrant economy. But did you want to add anything there?
Well, no, I think you're right. You're right on there. So definitely a problem, right? But you just said during the Industrial Revolution there was riots, which led to child labor laws, the 40-hour work week, things like that.
Right.
So there was definitely some pain. Anytime you have a change, there's going to be some growing pains that are involved, and especially in a democracy. Democracies, a lot of times we think of democracies as, hey, I've got my vote, you've got your vote. But oftentimes, if you look at our history, it's a violent history, right. And it's a messy history, but it's the best that I know of, and it's the best that I think a lot of people. If we look at the United States, we are still to this day have more immigrants coming to America than any other country in the world. So, still the best place to be, in my opinion. We had our growing pains, but then fast forward again to where we are now. If we look at 2019, in the past couple of years, we had arguably the best economy that we've ever had as a country. We had whatever how you want to define the labor force, the people who are actively working. We had more people actively working than. It actually wasn't the best time in history, but it was pretty darn close. So even despite all that, there were jobs created. And yes, you have cities like Detroit, which are ghost towns, and you've got a definite problem there. But the thing about people is we're a pretty hardy bunch. And if you look at us, we are descendants from people who packed up their families and traveled across oceans in unspeakable conditions. And once we got here, we packed up our families and went on covered wagons and risked being attacked by Indians and all sorts of dangers that we faced right here. Of course, that's politically incorrect. There's probably people of Native American background that would say. My point is, people traveled in unspeakable conditions, and they made it. And today, it's maybe easier than it has ever been before because we can get on public transportation, or we may have to move to places where they're offering a job. And eventually all that will shift again because you had mentioned Silicon Valley. Looking what's happening to Silicon Valley right now. We're actually having people leaving California and moving to different places. Austin, Texas.
It's the same companies. It's not, it's the same people. They're just relocating.
They're relocating, right?
Right, yeah. But they're not relocating to Detroit, Cleveland. Like, they're relocating to Austin, Texas, who has no problem. They have a vibrant economy. They're not moving to Michigan or North Carolina or some of these other places.
All cities have had, if you look at cities throughout history, whether you're looking at Babylon or you're looking at Rome or Istanbul, which is Constantinople, which is Istanbul, same thing, right? But they all have had their time in the shining sun. They've all fallen at certain places. So I think that's a natural progression of a cycle, just like it's a market cycle. You've got countries and cities that come in and out of favor.
So the one point I wanted to hit home. So to preface this, at the beginning of the podcast, I had mentioned like the presidential campaign of Andrew Yang. He articulates these ideas in the best way that I've ever heard him. So I would recommend to everybody to listen to one of his long form discussions, not some like 5-minute news interview that he did, where he can really get into like the nitty gritty and the numbers and the data. So some of these numbers I have like taken from some of the studies that he's cited. So I just wanted to cite my source kind of just before I go into some of the stuff. But one of the points that I really wanted to hit home was some of our numbers that we use. And I mentioned the unemployment rate as the first one. But a lot of the numbers that we use to track our economy are they're not really accurate, and they don't really depict what we want them to predict. So
plus they're old.
They're old, right? So like GDP doesn't really tell us much about standard of living, even though that's the number or GDP per capita is the number that's thrown out as the standard of living metric. It's like a nice bottom line that everybody can look to, but it's an inaccurate representation. And then there's like people will throw out the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrial Average or the unemployment rate, but they don't really tell us about the lives and when the lives of the people, and when governments live or die by these numbers, it can lead you astray. Like, so for instance, Andrew Yang will give the example of his wife who chose to stay at home with their children as opposed to continuing her career. So if we look at a number like GDP, the market would value that shift negatively. It would actually decrease the GDP because she's not participating in the workforce, even though the value that she's providing, spending time with children, like reading to them, like all the things that you do with children, that has much more value than any value that she's going to add in a company. But the GDP number doesn't accurately represent that value. And so when you said over the past, sorry, go ahead.
No, I would say to back you up on your GDP, like even the GDP to use as lifestyle or quality of life is not sufficient, but even to measure our own country. Like if you look at what is being measured, the United States has changed. I don't want to use the word evolve because evolve would mean it has changed into more of a service economy, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're not manufacturing as much things as we were 50 years ago. So at least as far as a percentage of our GDP. And so what they use to measure that is not an accurate reflection of what the United States is actually doing right now.
Right. And then so we spout off the number that GDP rises however much a year, and we celebrate that number. But over the past couple of years, while GDP is up, excluding this year is an outlier. I think we can comfortably omit this year and some of the macroeconomic data because of the anomalies. But like even though these numbers would reflect the fact that it's likely that automation and AI are going to accelerate because of COVID and not decrease, but that's a separate point. So while GDP has risen, suicides have also risen, drug overdoses have risen, and life expectancy is actually down for the first time in over 100 years. So like as Crosby Advisory, like if the number that we chose to follow was like our Twitter followers, right? That's the only number we cared about. That's the number that got reported. And we didn't care about like the performance of the accounts, customer service, client acquisition. All we cared about was Twitter followers. We would be going in a really bad direction. And like it's the same thing for macroeconomic data. Like our data sucks, and we kind of need to shift the paradigm and collect macroeconomic numbers that so we can shoot for goals that actually would matter and tell us how we're doing as a society. And then like numbers like physical and mental health, freedom from substance, clean air, clean water, and then GDP could be a sliver of that, but it wouldn't be the whole enchilada. Yeah.
Okay, I'm in agreement with you with that we do need better numbers, and the data that we're using is outdated in the sense that it does no longer reflect accurately what our country is.
Right. So Oh, so I wanted to. So the second thing, with going back to creative destruction. Sorry, we kind of got off track. So with creative destruction, it's not the jobs that are being created aren't happening in the places where they're being destroyed. And then also the second thing, like with retraining programs, that's a thing that's often stated. So just pulling some numbers, there's 3.5 million truck drivers in the United States. It's the most common job in 29 states, and the average truck driver is a 49-year-old male with a high school education, and they're making $50,000 a year. Okay, so federal retraining programs have an effective or have an efficacy. Is that right? Is that efficacy? How efficient they are, or how effective they are? Did I say
Okay.
that correct?
Yeah. Efficiency.
Okay.
Yeah. Whatever.
Whatever that word is.
Efficiency.
Of 0 to 15%. So 3.5 million people. Let's give the most charitable 15%. And even if like let's say we got that number to 80 or 90 or 99%. If you're an employer, would you rather hire a 50-year-old male with a high school education that got a certificate from a coding boot camp put on by the government, or would you rather hire the 25-year-old kid that's just out of college and you can pay him less, doesn't have a family, doesn't have health issues, doesn't have prior obligations? Which one would you rather hire?
Yeah. You're right. It probably skews more towards the younger. Although when we were looking to hire, that's actually what we were looking for: someone older. But I see your point there.
And then how good would you say I am with technology on a scale from 1 to 10?
You are twice as good as me, if not more. So you're very good.
So I have made an honest attempt 3 times to try to learn some sort of coding language. I tried various languages, and it is, to understate it, is incredibly difficult to do so. Like to learn the syntax and like how to, like anybody that has done this knows how similar it is to learning a new language, and then times 5 in difficulty. Like it's extremely difficult to do this. So to retrain somebody to do this incredibly difficult skill. And so like when we're talking about retraining, the reason I bring up software engineering is because like these are the types of jobs that can replace the standard of living of somebody that's making $50,000 a year. You'd probably make more than that as a software engineer, but in a world where like 20 years in the future, there'd probably be more software engineers, which would drive the wages down. I'm just making some assumptions there. It's not a perfect comparison, but software engineering is a good place to start. Do you agree?
Yes.
Right. So it doesn't seem likely that you're going to retrain a coal miner or a truck driver to be coding in Python or like creating like or being proficient at coding languages when going back to the previous example of a 25-year-old that just spent 4 years trying to do it. It just doesn't seem like a plausible solution. I
think you're taking a step there, or a leap there, though, in saying that every job that's going to be created, it has to do something with technology in order to kind of support the AI or support whatever the system is. Remember, the fear is, the trap that we fall into with the fear is that because the jobs that will be created are unknown, it's hard to say, yeah, this is what they can do. In many ways, it's a leap of faith that's going to happen, and we are. I mean, anytime we get into AI, right? If you talk about anybody, there's essentially 2 sides of that AI spectrum, where you believe there's one side that believes that AI is going to take over the world, and eventually they'll become smarter than us, and they'll be self-aware, and then at that point in time, they'll be able to squash us out, and we're creating our own death sentence essentially with AI. And then there's another form that says no, AI is going to work along with us. It's going to enhance things. It's going to make us better. It's going to allow us to be more human because we're going to be able to be focused on the things that make us human, that connection with other people, or that caring, that love, whatever that is. So it would be a far leap to say that we're going to be able to take every 49-year-old truck driver and make him a computer programmer or something in that realm. I don't think that's going to be the case, though. I think there's going to be jobs that are going to be created that are still going to be manual, still going to require some level of skill in order to learn them. But I don't know what those are.
I think that it was a study that said, I think it was from McKinsey, that said 80% of the jobs are automatable, and I don't see a scenario where. Because even if you look at like the trade deals with NAFTA that kind of destroyed the manufacturing jobs, if you look at that as a case study, the jobs that it destroyed, and then the jobs that it created. The jobs that it created were for college graduates, which is why you see like this big push from politicians to like everybody needs a college degree, which is actually like we could have that discussion too, where it's like if everybody has a college degree, it's not really like the college degrees itself isn't really the thing that's valuable. It's the skills, right?
It's the skill of learning how to learn, essentially, is what I take it. It's because look at what I do for a living. I was a chemistry minor and I was an exercise physiology, biology major. Nothing remotely to do with but what it taught me was how to learn. And so if there's any skill that I want to pick up, I'm confident that I can do it. Now I'm sure there's skills that I'm too dumb to learn. I understand that. I'm probably never going to be doing the type of work that Lex Friedman is doing.
Right.
But that's beyond my scope. But I can learn quite a bit. If I wanted to learn to be a carpenter, I could probably learn to do that. I could learn to do concrete. I could learn maybe a little bit about computer programming, at least more than I know now. But that's the thing.
It's really hard. It'd be cool if you learned how to do it, but it's pretty hard. I would start with Excel first.
Or Word, be able to turn my computer on. No.
Yeah, right, yeah. But that's a great point. But the thing that I would probably hit on is that a college degree is not the reason employers want a college degree is not because of it's not only because of the skills you learn with your degree. It's also many economists would call it a signal. So it's not that people want to hire a degree or people want to hire somebody with a degree because they're more valuable. It's because that it's too costly for somebody that's not a higher quality worker to get one. So it's harder to fool somebody. Like if you're a low quality worker and you're less likely to have a higher or a college degree.
Yeah,
it's basically the theory behind that. So sorry, I kind of go off.
No, I would say you're right on the thing, and I don't know if necessarily in the future everybody's going to have to go to college, but I can see a situation where you are severely behind the eight ball if you don't have training, whether that's a technical school or an apprenticeship or something out there that where you're learning skills that can actually be put to use.
I think so going forward over the next 30 years, I think one of the best things you can do if you're worried about AI and automation is do a trade,
for sure,
because automation from software is going to happen. I mean, it's already happening, like you said. Like go to any fast food restaurant, truck drivers, like the Tesla trucks in manufacturing, but it's going to be very hard to create a robot that can do plumbing, that can be a carpenter. Like those are a good short-term solution because hardware artificial intelligence is way possibly hundreds of years in the future, and we don't really have to deal with those problems. But I think that is a good solution for the short term, is kind of prop up trade schools. It's not often talked about, but I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so let's get to the meat of these things. So what is your solution as far as so Andrew Yang's, one of his proponents was a universal income, and
it's not just him. It's there's I know you're a fan of American history. Thomas Paine, who was one of the people of the founding of the country, was for a universal basic income. Martin Luther King was for a universal basic income, and Milton Friedman, who is a conservative economist, won the Nobel Prize. He was also for a universal basic income. Not to appeal to authority. Okay. I'm just saying it's not like this is a brand new idea. Like this is rooted in American values, and it has a long-standing history.
And it's been tried by, and many still use it, but it's been tried by many countries.
Did you know one state already has UBI? Yeah,
Alaska.
Yeah, they give their citizens $1,000 to $2,000 from.
It's based on the oil.
Oil money, yeah.
Yeah, based on the oil. So what would be the benefit in your mind? What would be the benefit of a UBI, and how much? How much is sufficient?
So the platform that Andrew Yang proposed is $1,000 a month from $1,000 a month to every adult 18 to 65. And then if you would have transfer payments like food stamps, housing assistance, Social Security, it would not go on top of that. It would replace that. So you'd only have the $1,000 or let's say $2,000 in other stuff. Like you can't have $2,000 in other stuff along with the the universal basic income. That was the policy proposal.
And what would be the benefit of that? Does he believe or you believe?
So basically, the benefit would be that it would create. So current welfare programs kind of create. They're kind of seen as like a ceiling where if you make too much money, you're like opted out of the program. But a universal basic income would go to every single adult. So it would create a floor where in the most developed economy in the world, the most dynamic economy in the world, nobody would be below the poverty line. It's the essence of the deal. So no matter what happened, if you wanted to start a business and take some risks, you would have that floor to fall back on, which I know is one of your...
But $12,000 would be below the poverty line.
It's not another point would be that it's not enough to completely discourage work as well. Like you couldn't retire if you had $12,000 a year.
So what happens if I was working and I was getting a universal basic income of $1,000 a month and I lost my job? I was laid off. So do I get unemployment as well?
Well, you would get the $1,000. It depends what the actual amounts are, right? So if you got $800 in unemployment, you could get $800 in unemployment and then also $200 in UBI. That's sort of how it would work.
Gotcha.
But, sorry, I kind of got off track again. I lost.
And the idea, so let me get you on track. So the idea that the analogy that you gave me one time when you and I were talking about this in the office is you gave me the analogy of Monopoly.
Right. Yeah. So let me get that. Sorry. Yeah, that's perfect. Let me get back on track here. So if we think of, or how I often think of capitalism is it's basically a game of Monopoly where you need capital to actually play the game. You need, like if we go with a Monopoly example, imagine playing a Monopoly and everybody else gets $200, right? And you start out with zero. Like you don't have, and you can relate that in the real world where if you're born into poverty, you don't have any say in the matter, but that's just your roll of the dice. You have no economic resources. If you could give everybody like a baseline $1,000, just enough, just that starting amount of money to play the game, you would, on the margins, you would see more productive, like the people that are not, like you might bring up the example where, like if you give people too much money, it creates a disincentive to work where, like the government takes care of all my needs. So what's
we're seeing right now? Well, what we're seeing right now with the unemployment benefits.
Well, sure. That's, we could talk about that too, but, so back to, the Monopoly example. So if you gave everybody enough money to just start the game, and on the margins, that one person who would be very successful if he just had enough resources to go out on a limb and take a risk and follow the American dream, start a business, it would allow those people to effectively do that rather than, I don't know, take out a loan from a bank, which would any sort of hindrance to his success would be alleviated a little bit, where you would be more likely to take risks and create growth. You can create growth rather than just be dealt a shitty hand and not have any recourse to do so.
And I don't know if there's any way of knowing this. I wonder how much of that, in theory, is actually what happens in practice. Like, so right now we've got a situation where people who are receiving these unemployment benefits are not seeking jobs. And you had mentioned in the previous podcast that some people, and there's nothing wrong with this, you can choose to be that. Some people are not income optimizers, they're income satisfiers.
Right.
So they're gonna find that income where they can make it, and they're not gonna, that's fine with them, right? They're not gonna make any effort to do any more than that. So the people who are at home right now collecting unemployment benefits because it's financially more beneficial to them, if that's a word, to stay at home and get those benefits than it is to go off and earn their living. How many of them are out starting businesses right now? How many are taking those proceeds and using that up as an opportunity to start businesses or take those risks? I don't know if there's a way to determine that, but that would be a question that I would have.
So to parse out the data a little bit, so when that initial jobs number came out, where 266,000 out of 1 million expected jobs included in that number, and this is consistent with when UBI has been put into practice, that number oftentimes includes mothers that choose to stay at home with kids and retraining. So if you wanted to, maybe you didn't have enough money to go back to school, but that's something you always wanted to do, and now you have the means to do so, that number would be included. And it's sort of like, it's not just 750,000 people who are just lazy. Like, that's not exactly that the discrepancy between
I don't know if I would, and again, I don't want to label them as lazy,
Right.
because they might be hard workers, but they may look at the situation and say, it's
Sure, you're
better
right, you're
for
right,
me,
yeah.
financially better to stay at home, to do that. Which to me, if you, and I'm going to sound like an old man, if you wanted to give somebody freedom, let me start by, if you want to take somebody freedom away from somebody, you give it to them for free, and you make them dependent on what you're giving them going forward. If you wanted to free somebody, you would teach somebody how to do it themselves, how to earn it themselves, how to stand on their feet themselves. So I've got no disagreement that there is a fraction of this American population that is on the bubble, and it's that they're at risk and they're in danger because their jobs are potentially being replaced. And there's people who live on the lower ends. Your analogy about the monopoly, I think, is a good one. However, I think in the United States, I don't actually know if there's anybody who's actually starting from zero, because we live in a country now where if you lose your job and you get laid off, you can collect benefits for that.
So,
And
I think, but I mean, even use like, but it's the incentives are disaligned where, so you start taking unemployment benefits, and then like you want to take an entry level job somewhere, and it's like you would be making less with taxes and everything than if you just kept collecting unemployment benefits. Like, that's like a disaligned incentive. Whereas if you could still take the job and then you still get that $12,000, that would eliminate that that problem there.
do you think, though, that in a lot of cases, not every case, in a lot of cases, if you take that entry level job, which there's nothing wrong with that. All of us at one point in our life have probably worked an entry level job, but there also is nothing keeping you there, in the sense that if you understand that you take that job and you do a fantastic job, you learn the skills necessary to get to the next job, and ask the questions: what skills would be required for me to get to the next job? I guess for you to work that entry level job is not a death sentence, or it's not a life sentence where you would have to do that. Which gets back to the training on it. I would be more apt to, if I'm going to spend money on, or have us to spend money on stuff, and I guess from a moral standpoint, I see where you're going with this, and I know what the universal basic income, a lot of times they're saying, okay, we're taking from maybe corporations who are not paying their taxes, or not paying their percentage of taxes that they should be paying, and we're going to pay for that. But when I take from something and I give to something else, there's something about that, and again, I'm old school, that almost seems immoral to me.
Okay, so hold on.
From
Just to clarify the position, it's not. That would be consistent with the tax on income, where if you are literally earning and then they take it from you, the tax plan that Andrew Yang would propose to fund UBI is a tax on consumption, a value-added tax. So it's just like, so Amazon is a United States company. There's a reason that Amazon wasn't started in North Korea, right? It's because of property rights, patents, all these things that make the United States a great place to start a business, and in particular with like networking effects, the United States in particular to start a business. So with all of this infrastructure and everything, they benefit greatly, and they're also in the meantime decimating they're decimating Main Street. Like, if you go back 10 years, you see a lot of mom and pop shops on Main Street, but the reason why you don't see a lot of those anymore is because people just choose e-commerce, or they just shop online through Amazon, and they didn't pay back into the system that allowed them to decimate Main Street in the first place. So a value-added tax would, so all of the damage that is done. So I'm not saying that Amazon does 100% damage. I'm just saying that without a doubt, there's some damage being done the bigger and bigger Amazon gets. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
I
think that's just how go ahead.
So with the value-added tax, you would be able to like kick back a little bit of each sliver of each Amazon transaction back into the system that it is kind of destroying, I guess.
Yeah. I would say two things there. One is, yeah, anytime that you have a better mousetrap, people are going to go to it. And you can make the argument, while it has decimated Main Street, it also has enhanced many lives, right? If I can sit at home with my family and I can order the part that I need to repair my plumbing from Amazon, it's delivered the next day. I don't have to leave my family and go to the hardware store or whatever it is to get it, right? So they have a better mousetrap.
So pros and cons, though, because we're talking about a $20 trillion economy where 50% of the jobs can be automated. And I guess you can't pin that totally on Amazon, but you can pin it on the system as a whole if we place a value-added tax system. So,
but your value-added tax, the problem here is the tax code. We have a progressive tax code, and by progressive, I'm not meaning conservative or liberal. I'm just saying
that's just the name of it.
The more money you make, in theory, the more money you should pay, right? So the problem is the loopholes, and that is not necessarily a problem with Amazon itself. You can't fault Amazon itself for taking advantage of loopholes that exist in the rules.
Yeah, which is exactly why you need to shift it into a value-added tax, which is a tax on consumption.
Or what about just a flat tax? So anybody who makes over $50,000, whether that be individual person, pays 15, 20%, whatever that is.
Because it would be ridiculously high.
Would that solve a lot of problems?
No, because then somebody making $30,000 is. No,
I said anybody over. You could pick a number. Anybody over 50,000.
Oh, okay.
Would pay a flat tax. Below that, then you're still on your.
Well, then hold on, because then you could still reduce. Sorry, I'm on a lag here. I don't mean to interrupt you. I just realized we don't want to get into but I'm just on a lag here. Sorry, but I think that amount would be really high. I think you'd be surprised at how high that amount would have to be.
What amount?
So if you said everybody over $50,000 had to pay X to fund everything that we wanted to fund, just to keep it consistent with what we have now, that number would have to be pretty high.
I think because right now, but you're just saying that these corporations aren't paying anything; they're escaping their taxes. All of a sudden, we could pin them to 15% or 20% or 25%, whatever that is.
So if it's based on taxable income, though, they would still be reporting lower income, and they would still be paying less. You would still have those loopholes.
So, but the problem there is in the tax system.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not blaming Amazon for all of our problems. I think the tax system is stupid.
So I would agree with you that there's a problem, and so how do we solve that? Mine would be, if you're going to take $1,000 a year or a month and give it to somebody, rather than taking from somewhere else to spread that around. What if you created a system that
again somehow I think taking it is a misrepresentation, because it's not.
I don't think so. It was Amazon's. It was created, right? Amazon created it. Joe Smith down the street didn't create it.
But it's not a tax on what you earn. It's a tax on what you consume.
What Amazon consumes?
No. A value-added tax would be yes. So basically, it's something that's unavoidable. You can't say you consume less. If you have receipts, it's you bought what you bought.
Right. I mean, we could put a name on whatever you want to call it, but it's coming from Amazon and it's going.
I disagree, because the incentives matter. Because with an income tax, you're disincentivizing income. Am I wrong? Do you disagree?
No, I'm sorry. We are on a lag here. You froze there. I thought we were in another. So whether you tax income or you tax production, it's coming from somebody, though, right?
But I would make the point that incentives matter. I think that's because be careful what you incentivize, right?
Right. And that's why why I don't think we incentivize just giving people money. I think the better way to do that would be to train them. And so you and I were talking before, and you gave the idea of, or the example of Detroit. What do we do with Detroit? If I've got $100,000 mortgage on my home in Detroit, and the house is worth $20,000, what do I do there? Because I can't pick up and move. Actually, you could pick up and move. I could pay my mortgage from California. I could pay my mortgage from Nashville. I could do that anywhere. I don't think anybody the rest of America is in debt to make sure that Detroit exist as a city. I think what we want to do is we want to provide opportunity for the citizens to be able to go out and get a job, be able to learn. So I would be for, if I'm going to pay for something, why not pay for training? Pay for training, whether it's a trade, whether it's some skilled job that they can do. And maybe that's part of the unemployment benefits, is where they'll give you unemployment for a period of time and you can go out until you find your job. But if you can't find your job, then in order to continue them, you've got to go get training.
So another advantage, a distinct advantage over that UBI has as opposed to that plan, is yours would have to increase bureaucracy. With UBI, you just send everybody a check. With you're talking about creating a whole nother branch of government and a complicated thing that you need administrators for, and et cetera, et cetera. With UBI, one of the benefits is that it sort of decreases the size of government in a way where, I mean, think of all the money it would save if you could cut down the amount being taken from X government program because of just all the administrators that you wouldn't need anymore.
UBI has been practiced in a number of different countries. It was recently in 2017, Finland experimented with it. They opened it up in 2017. They closed it down in December of 2018. It was widely considered a failure. Now there's arguments there as to why that was. Many provinces of, I shouldn't say many, several provinces of Canada has tried it.
I'm familiar
and
with
got rid of it.
The Canada one, but not the Finland one.
Yeah. Spain, Uganda, Iran. I mean, these are Brazil. These are all countries that have experimented, and none of them I would consider to be powerhouses as far as economic or even quality of life.
So one thing that's interesting about the Canada experiment, they only saw hours worked decrease by 1%, which is a counter argument to what you would say is that it's a disincentive to work. And the people that did increase or did decrease work hours were like mothers and people that were retraining or going back to acquire skills.
Would you say that there's a potential slippery slope here with UBI, in the sense
yes,
that
I would. Yes.
You said it doesn't?
Yeah. Sorry, no, go ahead.
I would say you said it doesn't increase government, but I would say it makes us more in debt to government. And I think you could see a situation where you've got politicians running on raising the UBI, right? So that, and where does it stop? Do we guarantee people $12,000? Do we guarantee them $25,000, $50,000? Where does it stop at? And we're a country that already has a debt problem.
Right. So I think that is one of the biggest issues is that, I mean, one of the biggest reasons I was a supporter of Andrew Yang is because listening to him for 5 minutes, you never get the sense that he has a disingenuous bone in his body. He's an entrepreneur that just saw a problem and he just ran for president. That's literally his story. And if you go deeper into his story, it's very fascinating. But I could see a scenario where somebody that was disingenuous would, or especially with the rise of populist politics where just say the most popular thing and you get elected. That's like the rise of Bernie Sanders or the rise of Donald Trump is a testament to that, where somebody would just be running on, we're going to give you more rather than doing it for the right reasons. That is a genuine critique to UBI. Yeah.
Well, I think it's an interesting concept. I think you bring a lot of knowledge to that. I have trouble wrapping my head around it for doing that, but who am I?
So one of the ways that, just to cap it off, one of the way that Andrew Yang frames it, he doesn't actually call it UBI. He says picture America as a stock, right? Ticker symbol USA, right? So if America was a stock,
dividend.
Yeah, if America was a stock and it was a very successful business, like we have the most dynamic economy in the world, back-to-back World War champs. The USA's the greatest. So we're going to decide to kick back, and then they would admit probably to having a little debt on the balance sheet in their earnings call, right? Yeah, but and then they decide to kick back a dividend to everybody that stuck with them. All the investors in the American economy, you'd kick back a dividend of $1,000. Like that would be seen as a good business decision, and Jim Cramer would be on Mad Money screaming "Bye, bye, bye!" You know.
Interesting point. I think I think it's going to be interesting to see how the next decade, 20 years or more, roll out and what happens with that. I think the AI right now is a big big component of both excitement and fear, depending on what side you're on, and maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely on the more scared side because like a crazy example, like think about like video games, because that's one of the first places where actual like consumers got to see the progress of technology, where the first video game was Pong, right, where the ball would go across the screen
Mm-hmm.
and bounce. And then like 20 years later we have, or I actually don't know when Pong was invented, so maybe let's call it 50 just to say overestimate. And now we have Grand Theft Auto, where you can like fly airplanes in HD, and you get in a lobby with 100
Right.
players. Like that's so like exponential progress in such a short amount of time, and then just extrapolate that out another 50 years. Uh, you just like never underestimate the power of compound growth. We're in the business of compound growth, so I would find myself more on the scared side, and I would recommend again, like I said at the top of the podcast, uh, to listen to like a long form discussion with somebody that can articulate the ideas of UBI. I'm not an expert on this,
Do you
but
think
a lot of people can articulate the main points better than I can.
so? If you could you see a potential problem where we got UBI, and I'm assuming there would be an inflation built into it, just like there's a cost of living adjustment to Social Security and everything else. If I look at and you had mentioned it's not a government program,
Well,
but it's
it's a
coming through.
government program. It just requires less administrators.
If I look at other government programs that we have, Social Security, which is currently 43, let me make sure I got here, 43 trillion. Its assets are 43 trillion. Let me see this. Its liabilities are 43 trillion dollars bigger than its assets. If I look at Medicare, Medicare is currently about 3.9% of the GDP, and it's expected to be 6% by 2045. We've got Medicaid, which is underfunded by both the state and the federal level. We've got the post office. Our government doesn't have a great track history of running things very efficiently.
Which is why which
And
is
if
why
we,
you should just give money to people rather than let government administrators tell you how to spend money.
but I think when in my opinion, I guess I'll stop with here because you brought up a lot of good points. Anytime we give money to people, it is a we disincentivize them. And I think we're seeing that with the current unemployment benefits. Um, I mean, I think if we really want to, let me end with this. If I look at your generation and my generation, both, we are actually in a beautiful time to be in America. In America, right? We have had there's been wars, but really no wars that have affected you and I. Like we haven't had to ration anything. We haven't had
Yeah,
to
right.
go be drafted
Yeah.
and go across and fight in a foreign war. We have never had. We had the 2008 recession that we went through. We had COVID that we went through. But all in all, it's a pretty easy time to be an American. I think during those easy times when we get a little soft, we maybe forget about the things that got us here. And we're not perfect as a country. We definitely need to be improved on. Our tax system's a mess. I think there's a lot of things we could do to fix that and maybe use some of that money to invest back into our people. But I have some hesitations about UBI. And I guess my biggest hesitation is that once it started, it would be hard to take out. Even though I mentioned Finland started it and took it out. Parts of Canada had it and then took it out. But I think it would be hard to do if you had other people who were depending on this, and some people would. They would depend on because their income, not optimizers. What do you call them? Income
Satisficers.
satisfiers. They would depending on that income, and so I think you would have a hard time taking away. And I think
Well,
you
you wouldn't
potentially
take it away.
be in a
You'd just give it to
situation,
everybody. It'd be $12,000 a year.
but it would be a runaway train. I think.
Hey guys, so the recording software that we use kind of crapped out on us in the last 3 minutes of Nate's audio just vanished. So the last thing that we talked about was just earnings coming up this week. We talked about NVIDIA where they had a blowout quarter, how they're expected to split their stock. But so I figured that would probably be the best place to best place I could. So we'll address this in the next episode. Sorry that it happened. Sorry it got cut off. Um, we'll see you guys next week. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Next week we're talking about. We went way off script. We talked about aliens and the possibility of extraterrestrial life. So, I mean, you might ask, what does that have to do with dynamic growth? And the answer is absolutely nothing. But it was just kind of fun to talk about. We both had a lot of fun doing that podcast. So look out for that next week.